a short video on how to paint greens, part 1. People find that green can be difficult because it's green. You know, there's light greens, dark greens. How do you make the greens look different, and how do you make your painting look interesting? So to start, I thought I'd quickly go over Monet and how Monet painted greens, and you can see there's a variety of greens within this image. And I'm going to quickly go through some of other images of his that show you how he did these greens differently. Now, a lot of what Monet did was he would scan his image or scene, and he would compare the greens that were in front of him. And Monet used underpaintings, and he also used reflected light. So here we can definitely see reflected light on the iris leaves, and if you're familiar with iris leaves, they definitely catch that blue violety glow of the sky, and it has a violet-like look to them. In the distance, though, we see how he used violets and magentas and so on, even red deeps, to show this foliage, both shadow and otherwise, to be kind of in the background compared to some of the other greens that he has. So depending on where the greens are plays a part in how they're depicted, in addition to the type of plant, and then there's the reflected light. So having foundational colors to start with before going into the greens is really important, and scanning and comparing so that you get an idea of what colors, what greens are warmer, what greens are cooler, and starting with that. As you can see in this painting of his, that there's a lot of blues there. You know, this is probably a cobalt blue in there. There's some violets in this part of the greenery. We've got very warm, like orangey yellows, and even some probably red deeps with white in it. So Monet did not use just green to depict green, but when you look at this, your brain tells you that these are green. So understanding the impressionist viewpoint on depicting the color of light is key to painting greens, and comparing your overall elements to each other is very important so that you see the differences in them, and it pops out what's cooler, what's warmer, and an idea of where to start. Again, another example of Monet's, here just in the foreground you see over here how cool these greens, but it's not just green. We've got blue, violety blues happening in here. We've got, you know, probably a raw sienna, orangey kind of coloring happening under these greens, and the green here is warmer versus the green used here is cooler. Same thing here. You know, he's got violets and blues and all different colors, in addition to the different types of greens that exist within a palette. So understanding your color wheel is extremely important to painting greens with color and light and interest, and not just using green. If you understand how within a color, any color, there are warms and cools and ranges in between, in addition to the value differences, and then learning how to interact the warms and cools of the different colors with each other is huge. And so I tell my students to actually physically paint the color wheel to experience how color interacts, both side by side and mixed. So another Monet, you see how violety this is, but we are pretty sure that this is some sort of green landmass in the distance. And we see a lot of reflected light from the sky happening in all parts of this painting. It's hard to know, you know, what was happening here. He may have depicted this cool as the kind of shadowed area of the green field, but it's a very marked difference, and it's not there really isn't a green that looks like this. He used potentially a yellow deep, some could be raw sienna, could be yellow ochre. There's a variety of things that could have helped him get that warm green that shows the difference in this foliage and how the light is hitting it. These are examples of students' work where you see how, they're new, they're beginners, and there's no fault in that, but how the mark is kind of missed. It's too raw, too dark, and just not enough variety. Similarly here, this is a little less jarring than the first, but still the colors are more tonal opposed to the impressionist type of or style of painting. And so although this is not horrible to look at, it's not as colorful as say Monet would have painted it, or an impressionist painter. Another example is this, where the person tried to depict this scene, and we have quite a variety of greens, and we don't want our shadows to be dark, dead space. Even the tree, we want to show color and form by a lit side and a dark side, but overall, comparing all the elements within to know what direction to go is key in knowing if something should be cooler, warmer, and understanding foundational colors is important as well. I think this artist did a more successful job in depicting this scene, although I can see some improvements that can be made. And the sky, for example, could be much lighter. The tendency for people is to go gray, and this is not a gray sky. Now, overall, this is probably a bright overcast, so we've got a lot of cloud action. There's not strong sun happening. So, you could say it's a gray day, but in terms of depicting it with color, you don't use gray. It's going to be color. And although I can see that this person tried to affect that, it's very dark. And when you compare this landmass using your squint mechanism to the sky, it's too close. But that being said, we see quite a difference in the green mass shapes. So we've got a green mass shape here, green mass shape here, this middle ground, and then this distance. And all of them clearly show where they fall within this landscape. This is clearly right up front, and granted, it's a different type of plant than probably what's happening here, but this is very close to the type of foliage happening back here, and we see how the underpainting and types of greens affect the clarity of color versus this. So I would use probably some type of violet, cobalt violet, possibly maybe some magenta to cool down. I would use it as an underpainting to cool down this area before putting my greens on there, so that this gets pushed back and is sort of muted down or dulled down, if you will, to show the difference. But again, scanning your scene, comparing color to color, value to value, helps you to know what direction to go. This is an Azalea Garden that blooms beautifully locally to me in May, and you can see how stark, sharp contrast there is with the sunlit areas versus the shadow areas. But you can also see within those shadow shapes and those sunlit shapes the differences in color. And again, that's where we compare our colors to each other in order to have a direction. Do we lean in more cool? Do we lean in more warm? Should it be lighter or darker? All of those things help us by scanning and comparing even a sunlit area to a shaded area. That can help. This is a very cloudy day. It was drizzly when I was there painting, and you can see how different, just a quick going back and forth, it's so different. And if you look at your scene as color and value, lights and darks, warms and cools, it takes the element of this tree and that bush and this grass out of the mix, so that your brain doesn't get clouded with, oh, this is a type of tree I need to, or this is grass, and that's where people get tripped up in depicting greens, because they're thinking too much of the actual object and not enough about actual colors of things. So like right here, just with these 3 bush masts or tree masts, they're ever so slightly different. And that is something that if you portray it, it's going to create a more interesting painting, even with something as gray and dark as this day was, which it was actually drizzling on us when we were there. This is something that falls in the middle where it's overcast or hazy, bright hazy day. So we have the colors are a little brighter, but yet still we don't have the strong contrast of the sun. And we're going to again compare our colors, our elements to each other, and our values to each other to get an idea of what direction to go. And you have to put something down before you even know. So you can't hesitate in that way. Doing your color wheel is extremely important. Physically painting a color wheel in order to see how colors interact. Understanding that within a color family, you're going to have cool to warm, cool to warm. All of your color, your primary colors and your secondary colors are going to have cool to warm factors to them. And getting acquainted with that is key. Then when you mix cool with cool or cool with warm, you see how that affects your mixtures, but then you've got the different colors. So this is a manganese, which is one of my favorite colors because it can go either blue or go green. It's a very warm blue, if you will, or a cool green, however you want to look at it. And this is that color with some white, and actually I think I just painted it thinly, but I used this yellow pale, and you see what a beautiful clear green that I get with that mixture. But depending on what it is you're painting, maybe you want something that's a little less bright or clear. So by mixing with, say, the cobalt blue, you see how that lemon yellow or yellow pale mixes with the cobalt. And even though, well, keep in mind that cobalt is a little warmer. I feel like it's sort of in the middle, but it's a little warmer, and you get a little more muted type green mixture. Similarly with the French ultramarine, this is actually a little cooler than that, and also has like a muted quality because of our French ultramarine being a little cooler quality in nature with the cool lemon or yellow pale. So then you start mixing, this is Viridian and Permanent Green, and you start mixing a warmer yellow with that, and you see how different your colors turn out. So this is a really important exercise to get acquainted with your colors on your color wheel and how they interact, not only side by side, but mixed. So you see here, I started this painting and I got my underpaintings in. When I compared my different greens, I saw a cooler quality to this distant land, which isn't, very evident in this photo. And that's why painting from life is extremely important, because the photo just doesn't capture what your natural eye sees. And sometimes you can get a decent photo to work from, but it's not always going to be from your phone. So this was taken with my phone, and my phone, although it's supposed to have a really good camera, I don't feel did the job. And this is really nothing like what I saw when I was standing there. But you see how I start with these underpaintings. There's definitely a green up here that I started with red deep. I've got a cobalt violet to depict what's happening in this distant land. And in some cases, I do go into just a type of green, depending, because of the light condition of the day. Now, if I was painting a sunny day situation, I would approach this entirely differently. So I'm now starting to fine tune this, and you see I start bringing a type of green in over that cobalt violet, and so it now has a green quality to it. Same thing up here, it has a green quality, but it shows up differently than most, if not all, of the other greens in this scene. And this is what I saw and how I compared these different greens to each other in that scene. And I tried something to see if it worked before I, continued on. This is just I just did a quick little study just using greens. Obviously, we've got azaleas over here that are not green plants, but in terms of the greens, I just went in with greens, and it's hard for me actually to do what I've seen other, amateur or beginner painters do, but I mean, it's really, it just doesn't quite have the same impact as this does, in terms of showing the differences of the plants, showing the differences of where they're located within this. And it just so happened that when I was there, the guy mowed the lawn, which brought out some of the dirt underneath, and it changed how I depicted even this grassy area. So it is very different from this. The light is hitting it differently, but when I do it just with green, you see it's sort of lackluster. It doesn't quite have the same impact. So this is the beginning of understanding how to paint greens from a colorist's point of view.